Hi, we're coming back, continuing our discussion of I-9 and this process and what it fits in terms of comprehensive immigration reform. And we're joined by Marquetta Lindt, who is a practitioner in this area, and some people know she has a lot of expertise when it comes to EVerify. And so we wanted to get an additional voice with Paul to confirm that this is something that, you know, we're trying to figure out how to prepare for what may come. And Paul, you said that now only a small number are being put through this process right now, but the ones that are being put through this process, how many of them have converted over to the electronic, and are they finding some beneficial reasons for going electronic?
Right, I would say most large and medium-sized employers who've made the leap into EVerify either at the same time or shortly thereafter have shifted to one of the electronic I-9 platforms. Mm-hmm. The reasons are very simple. It saves a lot of time just in terms of not duplicating the effort of preparing a paper I-9 and then inputting data directly on a DHS database. The electronic I-9 platforms communicate with EVerify and confirm the employment authorization for the employee. Secondly, they offer fairly robust reporting functionality. But thirdly, and most importantly, and this would apply to small employers perhaps even more so, it's really difficult to make a clerical error with an electronic I-9 platform. And what I've seen, and I'm sure Marquetta has seen when we've seen Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is commonly called ICE, you know, do an audit of employers, particularly small employers, the quality of their paper I-9s ranges from, you know, abysmal to very bad. And I've done audits of companies where I have found a 100% error rate in every paper I-9 completed, and that creates the potential for enormous civil liability and penalties that could be imposed on them.
So because this represents an investment that is going to have to be made, and maybe, you know, again, America is not creating jobs at the rate any of us would like to see. And yet here's another thing that's going to be an overlay on that process. How are you advising your clients to consider getting their processes in place to deal with it and to deal with it efficiently and effectively?
To deal with mandatory EVerify?
Yes.
Well, I think first of all, it's really important that the companies look carefully at their hiring processes, which they should be doing anyway, but in anticipation of the government's involvement in the hiring process in a much more direct way, they should be looking at their hiring processes, they should audit their existing I-9s, and they should look at their procedures and their protocols to make sure that they're doing everything the way that they should be doing. Along with mandatory EVerify, we're expecting that there's going to be a substantial increase in enforcement. And so this is the perfect time for companies to take a look at things and get their house in order before these mandatory programs would take effect under a comprehensive immigration bill.
Now, and just listening to you experts here today describe this very complicated process, I wonder, is America alone in this? When we think about global best practices, because many of these firms, of course, employ people all around the world and are facing some of these things, where does America stand in terms of the effectiveness of how it deals with this human capital issue? Are we...
I'll take a stab
yes.
at that. You know, many other countries, particularly in Europe and in Asia, have the equivalent of what we would call a national ID card. And that is the way that they, you know, do their best to be sure that workers in those countries are legal. Of course, all countries, all developed countries in the world have issue with undocumented workers of one type or another. In the United States, of course, politically, that, you know, draws a lot of fire from both the left and the right. You know, I think personally, eventually we will move very, very slowly towards something like that, some sort of more accurate electronic identifier, so that the employers could be absolutely certain that the workers they hire are legally entitled to work in the United States. EVerify is only getting us, you know, halfway to the goal line. We're not going to cross the goal line.
And what, you know, where that question was coming from is trying to turn a challenge into an opportunity. I'm wondering, is there a way where out of this can come a leadership role where our process becomes the best process and the one that works and the one that gets the job done and actually can be turned, instead of onerous, into a competitive advantage. Is that just pie in the sky, or can that actually happen? Because again, didn't America for so many years lead with the taking in of this talent and deploying this talent and harmonizing this talent into our workforce and into our communities and into our areas?
Well, I think as far as the EVerify program goes, I think we've got a little bit of a ways to go before I would say that we're a shining model for the rest of the world in terms of verification of documentation. The EVerify program has come a long way since it started in terms of error rates and in terms of both false positives, false negatives, and all kinds of other issues that gum up the hiring process for employers and that make the hiring process stressful and difficult for the employees. It's come a long way, but it still has quite a ways to go in terms of being the sort of error-free and easy-to-use system that's employer-friendly that I would hold out as a model for the rest of the world.
Okay, and along with policy, do you see, as again, you've seen the process from when it was all paper to paper and technology, and now people are just using the technology-based approaches, and you see the vendor community grow up around attempting to lessen the nature of the challenge by maybe making some complementary solutions. Has government, because Paul, you made the good point about not all of these systems are compliant. Has government encouraged the development of these compliant solutions that are in fact making the process more accessible and more adaptable?
Funny you asked that question, because the vendor community has invited and requested Department of Homeland Security to kind of follow the role of the Internal Revenue Service, in terms of laying out more clear standards and confirming that certain electronic vendor platforms are compliant. And to date, Homeland Security has refused to do so. And that leaves both not only the vendor community, but more importantly, the user community of these electronic platforms with a degree of uncertainty as to whether the platform they're using is compliant. Because if in the course of an ICE audit of an electronic I-9 platform, it is determined that the audit trail requirements, for example, don't meet ICE regulations, ICE's position is it is as though you have no I-9s. And therefore, we are going to kill you with civil penalties.
Okay. Yes, Marquetta.
Yeah, and to add to that, the government's perspective in terms of enforcement has been, as the government, we're auditing the employer, we're not auditing the program. And so the employer has a buyer beware sort of position that it needs to be in. It's really up to the employer to determine whether the program is compliant without any help from the government, which has been very, very frustrating for employers who would like some sort of seal of approval or some sort of indication from the government that in fact the program that they're selecting and investing in and using to try to be compliant is in fact one that passes muster. And one little known provision in the Senate bill that's actually quite exciting, I think, in this regard, is that the Senate bill does have a provision that would require the government to write regulations to put into place standards for electronic I-9 programs to ensure that they're compliant and to give employers the comfort to know that if they invest in that sort of program, that in fact that they're doing something that's helpful to them to get to that point.
Well, Marquetta, we're going to give you the last word on this integration of comprehensive immigration reform and the role of I-9s. Is there something us lay people can look out for in the coming months? What kind of things should we be looking to hear about the outcomes from this that relate to this process of I-9?
Well, I think with respect to the I-9s, I think everybody thinks that if there's comprehensive immigration reform, there's going to be more enforcement in the I-9 process. The employers are going to be held more accountable for their hiring processes and verification of their employees. And again, that it's going to include some sort of mandatory EVerify program, which is going to be very, very different. Up until now, the program has been in most cases voluntary. The government has really been promoting the program as something for employers to enroll in, an attractive, user-friendly program. If it becomes mandatory, it's going to become much more strict. The penalties are going to go up. The tolerance level of the government is going to go down for employers making mistakes with the EVerify program, and the liabilities are going to increase for employers in some ways. But I think in another way, if EVerify becomes mandatory, It will be helpful in some ways to employers. It will provide employers with some level of safe harbor if they rely on information that they receive from the government through the EVerify program. It will give employers a more vetted workforce in the sense that they are now required to run their employees through the EVerify program, although, as was mentioned earlier, it won't protect employers from people who are able to game the system and get through EVerify through identity theft. But if the government comes knocking and looks at the documentation of their employees, the employers are going to be in a better situation because they're just going to have cleaner workforces, and so there's going to be less disruption to the employer in terms of employees being taken away. And I think there's some other, also because of the EVerify program being electronic and electronically based, I think it will hopefully move employers towards doing a more careful job of completing their I-9s, because more of that I-9 information will need to then go into the government database, and hopefully that'll decrease the employer's liabilities too. And then finally, I just want to close with a couple of other concepts that are floating around that I think will be really helpful to employers that are sort of an outgrowth of these verification and EVerify provisions. There are some provisions being talked about that would allow employers to have more options for employees that are being hired remotely, which is right now a huge operational issue and a huge liability issue. There are some helpful provisions that would allow employers some more flexibility to do remote hiring. And it also looks like the verification provisions, at least in the Senate bill, are written in a way that at some point would be moving away from paper I-9s and really moving to a fully electronic system. But I think that's a little bit of a ways down the road.
Well, those are some great things to look out for. And Paul, you have a closing comment as well?
One quick comment. You were asking about what should the business community take away from
Yes.
the coming debate. Even if Congress passes a comprehensive immigration reform with a path with earned legalization status, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to be legally entitled to work in the United States. And I-9s and employer sanctions and doing it right still matters.
Well, it certainly does. And I think the word to the wise today is you better get to know EVerify. If you're dealing with foreign workers, these are things that have been an option, but they may become mandatory. I want to thank my guest, Marquetta Lindt, for being here and providing this wonderful advice and counsel. And Paul Zulkie, you too have been a great insight to us. It's hard to get your hands around it, but it's wonderful to know that there are these quality practitioners that are working to make a difference to make the process doable, achievable, and the end result be one that people can live and learn and benefit from. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll be back next week with more good content in this area on Technology Access Television.